Peaches understood all too well that her body was quietly betraying her more and more each day. The cold test results and the increasingly perfunctory doctor's appointments had already told her a truth she could no longer deny. Every medical door had slammed shut. There was no way out, no new drug or experimental treatment plan that could pull her back from the edge. Yet while other people might cling to a fragile belief in miracles, Peaches chose a very different path. She no longer believed she could be saved, but she still believed she could do one last thing to shatter the false peace of Fairmont Crest, like a final explosion before the light inside her went out for good. On those long, sleepless nights when the spasms of pain made it impossible to lie still, Peaches quietly walked backward through time in her mind, gathering up the fragments of memory she had deliberately buried for years. They came to her as cut-up scenes and swallowed words, as times when she had witnessed other people's schemes and had to pretend she had seen nothing. They were dirty secrets the upper crust believed they had neatly entombed behind elegant contracts, sterile trust funds and photos torn into pieces then tossed into the trash. This time, each memory returned like a small knife, and for once, Peaches did not look away. The letter addressed to Leslie was born out of nights like that. It was not a gentle apology from a foster mother hoping to soothe the ache of abandonment, nor was it a final gift meant to comfort the child who had once clung to her. Peaches did not polish the past, and she certainly did not scrub the stains off anyone's reputation. That letter was a catalogue of sins, an indictment written in a trembling but resolute hand, where every line was heavy with truths that had gone unnamed for far too long. In it, Peaches revealed the real origin of the money in the Barbara Fund, the same fund Fairmont Crest had long treated as a symbol of generosity and goodwill. She laid out how that money had been created, traded and shifted in the shadows before being dressed up in the clean costume of charity. She recorded the name of the person who had manipulated everything from behind the scenes, the one who had controlled the flow of money and orchestrated every signature and decision as if the entire community were just a game board. Worst of all, Peaches explained the true reason Leslie, and not anyone in the DRI family, was chosen to be the heir, the name attached to the Barbara Fund, the center of a story that looked like opportunity but was, in reality, a cold-blooded calculation. Every time she stopped writing, Peaches felt her hand grow heavier, as if each sentence she set down was stripping away another layer of the mask Fairmont Crest had worked so hard to build. She knew that once this letter was read, there would be no way back, no way to call the secrets home again. But that very feeling, the fear and the sense of release twisting together, was exactly what drove her to keep going. Peaches did not leave Leslie a neat, tidy tale. She placed in her hands a burning coal, something that would either set everything else on fire or scorch the one who held it. When Peaches finally drew her last breath, the world around her sank into a silence that was nothing like the usual surface calm at Fairmont Crest. People could mourn, could read beautifully written eulogies about the life of a woman who had always seemed to stand on the outer edge of the big families. Yet somewhere else in that polished community, her letter lay quietly in a safe, far removed from the tears and flowers. It sat there like unused evidence, like a sealed gate leading down to hell, waiting only for the right, or wrong, hand to open it. In the dark, the envelope was just another inanimate object, but the words inside were secretly waiting for their moment to come alive, waiting for the second they could tear apart the neat order Fairmont Crest was so proud of. For most of her life, Leslie had believed she was nothing more than an outsider, someone looked down on and only half accepted. She lived in a constant in-between, partly included, partly pushed out. She always noticed the judging glances, the carefully disguised jabs hidden behind polite smiles, the doors that never truly opened for her the way they did for those who shared the DRI name. To Leslie, everything she had ever received felt like a conditional handout rather than something she was naturally entitled to. So when the envelope with her name on it was finally opened and her eyes passed over the first lines written by Peaches, Leslie still assumed it was simply a farewell letter, a late attempt to explain their bond. But the more she read, the more she realized this was nothing like any last words she had imagined. Right from the beginning, the letter shattered every assumption she had clung to. Peaches did not romanticize Barbara, nor did she deny that Leslie had grown up as the girl standing outside the power circles. Instead, she pointed out that those very feelings of inferiority had been used by certain people, turning Leslie into the ideal pawn in a ruthless deal between the dead and the living. The words on the page did more than stain Fairmont Crest's pretty picture. They cracked the entire framework Leslie had used to make sense of herself. She saw, in stark detail, the reality that she had never simply been pushed aside. She had been a crucial piece in someone else's plan, holding a position she had never known about and certainly never chosen. The lines about the origin of the Barbara Fund ripped open the curtains one by one. Leslie had once believed that Fund proved real kindness, that it was a bridge carrying her toward a more respected place. Now, thanks to Peaches, she could suddenly see the bloodstains and fingerprints smeared across the doorway she had walked through. At the same time, the letter hinted at a familiar name, someone Leslie never would have suspected was behind the decision to sacrifice Peaches years ago, all to protect the secrets bound up in bank accounts and legal documents. That name did not need to be written many times. Once was enough to make her heart drop and force her to reorganize every memory she had of that person. If what Peaches claimed was true, then her silence and eventual sacrifice were not accidents or vague misfortune. They were the direct result of a deliberate choice, an order given to preserve the pride and wealth of the people living in the grandest houses of Fairmont Crest. The closer she came to the last line, the more Leslie felt an invisible cord tightening around her throat. Each paragraph appended some part of Barbara's history, some piece of Peach's life, and some layer of her own identity. The thing she had held dear, the image of Barbara as a nameless, distant figure, the picture of Peaches as her one solid anchor during those lost years, the feeling that the Barbara Fund finally gave her a respectable place, all began to sway and fragment. The meanings overlapped and tangled into a roar in her mind. Where did true affection end and exploitation begin, and at what point had she stopped being a person and become a convenient narrative for people eager to sanitize their sins with a touching story? By the time Leslie's eyes reached the final line, where Peaches offered no answer, only a void in the shape of a choice, everything she had ever believed collapsed like a building whose inner supports had been quietly removed. Barbara was no longer a hazy, anonymous presence but the knot at the center of a chain of filthy transactions wrapped in the language of service to the community. Peaches was no longer just a quietly enduring foster mother, but a silenced witness who had traded the rest of her life for an arrangement she now handed back to Leslie in the form of a cold confession. And Leslie, who had always thought of herself as only a victim, was forced to face the reality that she now held in her hands the final piece capable of bringing down the entire game Fairmont Crest had constructed. As she folded the letter, or simply let it fall quietly onto the table, Leslie realized she had been driven into a crossroads where there was no safe path. The first option was to bury the letter with the past, lock it away in a safe and let these secrets remain like sludge at the bottom of a lake, never disturbed but constantly poisoning everything above. If she chose silence, Fairmont Crest would continue to glitter under the lights by its security gates, would keep hosting galas and speak of Barbara and the trust funds in polished, noble terms. The community would retain the stability it worshipped. But the price would be herself. Every time she looked in the mirror, she would see a woman who knew the truth and still bowed her head, who recognized she had been used and still chose to play the obedient pawn. The other option was far more chilling, to use the letter as a weapon of revenge, as the bomb Peaches had quietly placed in her hands. If she allowed those words to come into the light, the perfect image of Fairmont Crest would be ripped apart. People would have to see the rot behind the dignified contracts, would have to hear the names they once revered dragged into the context of guilt, and would have to confront the fact that this wealthy community had been built on the sacrifice of people who never appeared in any speech. Leslie could drag their whole world down with the truth, forcing those who had orchestrated her life to finally pay. But she also knew that if she did, there would be no way back for her, not to the DRI family, not to those who had pretended to stand with her, and perhaps not even to the version of herself she had been before. Standing between those two extremes, Leslie suddenly felt as if she were balanced on a line thinner than anything she had ever known. The words in Peach's letter were still there, etched into her memory like a map to hell that only she possessed. Whether she buried it or set it off, there was no returning to the old ignorance. Peach's long silence had ended in a confession as calculated as it was desperate, and now it would be Leslie's silence or her voice that decided whether Fairmont Crest would continue living inside its flawless shell, or tremble at the earthquake unleashed by a single letter. Thank you all for your loyal support and listening.